Ever wonder what it costs to take a shortcut on a cruise ship? Try 2,032 lives. The Costa Concordia captain thought he'd impress some tourists with a close-up view of an island. Turns out, rocks don't move out of the way for cruise ships. What's up, expensive mistake explorers? Welcome to Wow Amazing. In this video, we will explore the most mind-blowing, costly disasters in human history that'll make your wallet feel sorry for these people. But before we start counting up these billion-dollar blunders, do us a favor and smash that subscribe button harder than these people smash their budgets. And don't forget to hit that notification bell. It didn't cost anyone millions of dollars, but it feels left out. All right, get ready. This countdown is packed with failures so expensive, they'll make you feel like a financial genius for buying that overpriced coffee this morning. Number 10, Shong Bridge collapse. Let's begin our countdown with a disaster that proves even the smallest details can have massive consequences. The Shong Bridge in Seoul, South Korea, was one of the city's busiest commuter routes, stretching 3,805 feet across the Han River and connecting two major districts. On the morning of October 21, 1994, hundreds of people were making their usual rush hour commute when disaster struck at exactly 7:40 a.m. A 157-foot section of the bridge's central span suddenly collapsed 65 feet into the river below, taking cars, minibuses, and a fully loaded bus with it. The tragedy killed 32 people and injured 17 more. But what made this disaster particularly frustrating was how easily it could have been prevented. The bridge had already been receiving complaints about unstable foundations that caused an unsteady swinging sensation when people walked across it. When investigators dug into the cause, they discovered a construction error that would make any engineer cringe. The steel joints supporting the central suspension had been welded with the wrong thickness, just 8 millimeters instead of the required 10 millimeters. That tiny 2 millimeter difference caused the crucial connecting pins to snap under pressure. But wait, it gets worse. The bridge was designed to handle a maximum weight of 36.3 tons per vehicle, but trucks weighing up to 47.3 tons were regularly using it for their daily commutes. It's like putting a sumo wrestler on a chair designed for a toddler. The state council had to pay $185,000 in compensation to victims' families, while completely rebuilding the bridge cost an additional $2 million, all because someone couldn't be bothered to measure their welding properly. Number 9, the Scorchy building. From bridges that fall down to buildings that try to cook people alive, our next disaster shows what happens when architects forget about basic physics. In spring 2014, London welcomed an ambitious new skyscraper to its financial district. The 525-foot-tall building became known as the walkie-talkie due to its distinctive curved design. But this shiny new tower was hiding a sinister secret that would soon earn it a much more menacing nickname. As summer arrived, London citizens began experiencing something completely unexpected: powerful rays of concentrated sunlight that could reach temperatures of 70 degrees Celsius. The building's south-facing concave surface was acting like a giant magnifying glass, focusing the sun's rays into a scorching beam of destruction. This wasn't just uncomfortably warm weather. The concentrated beam was literally melting tiles, caused a small fire on a barbershop's doormat, and completely warped parts of a local businessman's Jaguar. One enterprising journalist even managed to fry an egg using nothing but the building's reflected heat. The newly nicknamed Scorchy had become London's most expensive solar death ray, and something had to be done. Over the course of 6 months, engineers attached a permanent sunshade system called a brise soleil between the 3rd and 34th floors, costing over $12 million to install. That's a pretty expensive fix for a building that already cost over $250 million to construct. But the really embarrassing part, the architect Raphael Vignali had designed another building with the exact same problem. His Vdara Hotel in Las Vegas had been singeing sunbathers for years, earning it the nickname the Death Ray. When asked about it, Vignali actually admitted he knew this would happen, but claimed he didn't have the tools to analyze just how bad it would be. Someone really needs to tell this guy to stop designing super weapons instead of buildings. Number 8, Lotus Riverside disaster. Sometimes the most expensive mistakes come from the simplest oversights, like forgetting that buildings need solid ground to stand on. The Lotus Riverside complex in Shanghai was supposed to be an impressive residential development featuring 11 new high-rise apartment blocks. But at around 5 a.m. on June 27, 2009, residents in the area got a wake-up call they'd never forget when one of the 13-story buildings suddenly toppled over like a giant concrete domino. Miraculously, the falling building missed the surrounding blocks, avoiding what could have been a devastating chain reaction. Only one construction worker died in the incident, but the consequences could have been catastrophic if the nearly completed building had been occupied by families. So what caused an entire apartment building to just fall over? The answer is so simple it's almost insulting. Construction crews had excavated earth beneath the building to create a 15-foot underground parking garage, then piled all that soil 32 feet high on a nearby riverbank. The riverbank couldn't handle the extra weight and burst under pressure, sending water gushing beneath the building's foundations. The muddy, unstable ground caused the entire structure to topple over in a southerly direction, like a drunk person trying to walk a straight line. The solution would have been incredibly simple. Just move the excavated earth somewhere else. Instead, this massive oversight caused project investors to withdraw and demand their money back. Number 7. Lake Pinure disaster. In 1980, Texaco commissioned a drilling operation near Lake Pinure in Louisiana, an 11-foot deep freshwater lake that was about to become the site of one of the most bizarre industrial accidents in history. On November 20th, a $5 million oil rig owned by Wilson Brothers accidentally drilled into the dome of an underground salt mine after Texaco made a crucial miscalculation about their exact location. It sounds like a minor mistake until you realize what happened next. The damaged salt mine created a massive hole that began draining the entire lake, like someone had pulled the plug on a bathtub. Around 13 billion liters of water were sucked into an ever-widening vortex that consumed everything in its path. The powerful whirlpool swallowed the drilling platform, 11 barges, a tugboat, 65 acres of surrounding terrain, and even a small island in the center of the lake. Air escaping from the flooded mine created 400-foot geysers, and the nearby Del Cambre Canal actually reversed direction to flow backward into the whirlpool. When the chaos finally settled, the 11-foot deep freshwater Lake Pinure had been transformed into a 1,300-foot deep saltwater lake. Miraculously, no one was killed, but Texaco's wallet wasn't so lucky. The company had to pay $32 million to the Diamond Crystal Salt Mine and $12.8 million to a nearby plant nursery that got sucked into the vortex. In today's money, this miscalculation cost Texaco and Wilson Brothers over $140 million, making Lake Pinure perhaps the most expensive man-made lake in history. Number 6. Spirit of Kansas crash. Moving from water disasters to aviation catastrophes, our next mistake shows how a few drops of moisture can destroy $1.4 billion worth of modern military technology. The B-2 stealth bomber is one of the most advanced and expensive aircraft ever built. So when the Spirit of Kansas crashed on February 23, 2008, it represented more than just a tragic accident. It was a billion-dollar lesson in proper maintenance procedures. The aircraft had logged over 5,100 flight hours and was taking off from a base in Guam when it suddenly crashed just moments after leaving the runway. Both pilots ejected safely, but the state-of-the-art warplane was reduced to scrap metal in minutes. What could bring down such an advanced piece of military technology? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple. A few drops of rainwater in the air pressure sensors. The crash was caused by moisture in 3 of the aircraft's 24 air pressure sensors, which provide crucial data to the flight control system. When the water evaporated during calibration, it left the sensors providing false information about airspeed, pressure, and altitude, causing the aircraft to stall. The maintenance crews at the humid Guam base had already figured out an unofficial fix for this exact problem. They would turn on the heat and boil off the moisture before calibrating the sensors. But this procedure was never officially communicated to all maintenance teams. If someone had simply shared this information, the first crash in the stealth bomber's 19-year flying history could have been completely avoided. Instead, a few drops of rainwater turned $1.4 billion worth of advanced military technology into the world's most expensive pile of scrap metal. Number 5. Costa Concordia disaster. Our next disaster proves that sometimes the most expensive mistakes come from trying to show off. On January 13, 2012, the Italian Costa Concordia set sail for what was supposed to be a relaxing week-long cruise around the Mediterranean Sea. Instead, it became one of the most expensive maritime disasters in modern history, all because a captain wanted to impress some tourists. Just a few hours after leaving port, Captain Francesco Schettino made a fateful decision to deviate from the ship's planned route. He ordered what's called a maritime salute, essentially a close pass by the island of Giglio, to give passengers a better view of the coastline. The problem was that the area around Giglio was known for dangerous rocky outcrops that could tear through a ship's hull like a can opener. When the treacherous rocks became visible, Schettino ordered an emergency course change, but communication problems with the Indonesian helmsman meant the ship was steered in the wrong direction. In just 13 seconds, the time it took to correct the mistake, the massive cruise ship ran aground with 1,023 crew members and 3,206 passengers on board. The impact tore a 174-foot gash in the ship's port side, flooding 5 critical areas and causing the vessel to capsize. The human cost was devastating. 32 people lost their lives, but the financial consequences were equally staggering. The operation to refloat and remove the ship from the rocks where it was embedded began in September 2013 and cost a record-breaking $1.2 billion. Captain Schettino was sentenced to 16 years in prison for his reckless actions. But that didn't help with the total cost of the disaster, which reached an estimated $2 billion. That's more than 3 times the $612 million it originally cost to build the ship. The final bill included victim compensation, $93 million in lawsuits, massive salvage costs, and $100 million just to break the ship into scrap metal. All because a captain wanted to give his passengers a closer look at some pretty rocks. Number 4. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. Some mistakes take years to unfold, and Berlin-Brandenburg Airport is a perfect example of how a project can spiral completely out of control when too many people have conflicting ideas. Designed to mark Germany's reunification after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Berlin-Brandenburg Airport was supposed to become the 3rd busiest airport in Germany and one of the 15 busiest in Europe. It featured modern terminals, bold architectural structures, and even a working railway station. There's just one problem. Despite costing over $6.5 billion to build, not a single passenger has ever passed through its gates. The airport was originally supposed to open in 2012, but today all you'll find there are operating baggage tracks with no bags and a single ghost train that keeps running just to maintain airflow through the empty terminals. So, what went wrong? Pretty much everything. The global financial crisis of 2007 to 2008 reduced private contractor and investor involvement, so various politicians stepped in with public money and completely conflicting ideas about what the airport should be. At one point, officials decided to double the capacity inside the terminal building after construction had already begun. Then they realized the original designers hadn't included any space for shopping, so they ordered entirely new retail floors to be added. Invitations for the grand opening were sent out in 2012, but the ceremony had to be canceled when officials discovered that the entire fire prevention system was completely inoperable. A subsequent evaluation revealed 550,000 individual faults that needed fixing before the airport could be considered safe for use, ranging from incorrect light bulbs to entire cable systems installed backwards. With millions being spent each month just to maintain the empty building, Berlin-Brandenburg Airport has become a monument to poor planning and political interference. At over 3 times its original budget, it proves that sometimes the most expensive mistakes are the ones that never actually work. Number 3. The Vasa warship. Not all expensive mistakes are modern disasters. Some date back centuries and still make engineers shake their heads in disbelief. In 1624, the Swedish King Gustav II Adolf ordered the construction of one of the most spectacular warships the world had ever seen. The Vasa was designed to be the flagship of the Swedish Navy, a floating fortress that would strike fear into Sweden's enemies and demonstrate the kingdom's naval supremacy. On August 10, 1628, Thousands of excited onlookers gathered in Stockholm harbor to witness the maiden voyage of this magnificent vessel. The Vasa was truly impressive, lavishly decorated with hundreds of sculptures and carvings, armed with 64 bronze cannons, and designed to carry 300 soldiers into battle. There was just one tiny problem with this marvel of 17th century engineering. It was completely unstable. With the first gust of wind, the mighty warship immediately capsized and sank 105 feet to the bottom of Stockholm harbor, humiliating the king and becoming one of history's most expensive naval disasters. In the king's currency, the ship cost more than 200,000 riksdaler to build, which amounted to over 5% of Sweden's entire gross national product for the year. In other words, 1/20th of the nation's annual income suddenly lay at the bottom of the harbor. To put that in perspective, if Sweden spent the equivalent percentage of its GDP on a single ship today, it would cost $25.6 billion, making the Vasa one of the most expensive military projects in history. Archaeological examination revealed that the disaster was caused by poor design. The gun deck was simply too heavy for the ship's narrow hull. The Vasa had been built for appearance rather than seaworthiness, a classic example of form over function that cost Sweden a fortune. Number 2, the sale of Alaska. Sometimes the most expensive mistakes are the ones where you don't realize what you're giving up until it's too late. Russia's sale of Alaska to the United States in 1867 is perhaps the perfect example of this type of costly oversight. Alaska had originally been a fairly profitable territory for Russia, providing valuable fur, tea, and ice exports. But by the 1860s, Russian Emperor Alexander II was having second thoughts about keeping the remote territory. The harsh weather conditions made farming nearly impossible, and the vast distance from mainland Russia made it extremely difficult and expensive to defend from potential invasion. Faced with these challenges, the emperor decided to cut his losses and find a buyer for the frozen wasteland. In 1867, Russia and the United States reached an agreement to sell Alaska for $7.2 million. At the time, this seemed like a reasonable deal for both sides. Russia got rid of an expensive to maintain territory, and America acquired some additional land for expansion. The Americans weren't initially thrilled with their purchase either. Many newspapers mocked the deal, calling Alaska Seward's folly after Secretary of State William Seward, who negotiated the purchase. Critics argued that America had paid millions of dollars for a giant icebox full of nothing but snow and polar bears. Then, in 1896, everything changed. A major gold deposit was discovered in the Yukon, revealing Alaska's true potential as a gateway to incredible natural resources. Suddenly, that frozen wasteland didn't look so worthless anymore. Since the ratio of the Russian ruble to the US dollar was almost equal at the time, Russia didn't gain much immediate profit from the sale, but the United States has earned back its investment hundreds of times over. Economists now estimate that Alaska's oil and gas reserves alone are worth around $200 billion, not including its vast mineral wealth, fishing industry, and strategic military value. This is definitely one mistake that has Russian Emperor Alexander II turning in his grave. What seemed like a smart business decision at the time turned into one of the most costly oversights in history. Number 1, Sero Grande fire. Our number 1 spot goes to a disaster that proves sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. The Sero Grande fire of 2000, where the US government's attempt to prevent wildfires accidentally created one of the most destructive blazes in New Mexico's history. On May 10, 2000, officials at Bandelier National Monument began what was supposed to be a routine controlled burn. The idea was simple and logical. Drought conditions in the late 1990s had made the area incredibly dry and vulnerable to natural wildfires from lightning strikes or other unexpected ignition sources. The plan was to deliberately burn small sections of coniferous and grassy areas in a controlled manner, reducing the amount of dry vegetation that could fuel a larger, more dangerous wildfire later. It was part of a 10-year fire management strategy that had worked successfully in other locations. Unfortunately, the officials didn't properly account for the high winds on the Cerro Grande summit, where they started the fire. What began as a small, manageable, controlled burn quickly turned into a raging inferno that ripped through 150,000 acres of forest and residential areas. The fire was so intense and widespread that it required multiple evacuations of nearby communities. Families were forced to flee their homes with just the clothes on their backs, watching helplessly as decades of memories went up in smoke. Thankfully, no lives were lost in the disaster, but the fire wasn't declared fully extinguished until July 20th, more than 2 months after it began. By that point, the damage was absolutely irreversible. Officials faced harsh criticism for proceeding with the controlled burn, despite the contradictory weather conditions. Fire management experts pointed out that high winds should have been an obvious red flag that made the burn too dangerous to attempt. The U.S. General Accounting Office estimated that the total damages cost around $1 billion, making this one of the most expensive firefighting mistakes in American history. The irony is almost painful. A program designed to save money and prevent fire damage ended up causing exactly the kind of massive, expensive wildfire it was supposed to prevent. The Cerro Grande fire serves as an expensive reminder that sometimes the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes, especially when proper safety protocols are ignored in favor of sticking to a schedule. Okay, maybe losing billions of dollars is a little bit too much for some of these historical figures. Maybe they just needed better calculators. We've got to admit, most of these people probably had the best of intentions. These expensive disasters are as fascinating as they are costly, don't you think? Share this video if you do, and like and subscribe while you're here. As always, stay smart, stay safe, and remember, expensive mistakes are watching. This is Wow Amazing, signing off until next time.